are outlandish reports of families being attacked by a group of about 10 people. Victims were apparently eaten.
By the time I noticed something was wrong, the entire city was infested with zombies.
Those zombies aren't the only things crawling around out there.
I'm sorry about your daughter, but there isn't gonna be any rescue. We have to get out of here.
He's coming for us. We're both gonna die.
They risked their lives to reveal the truth, but no one believed them.
I'm not letting anyone leave my town. Everyone's gonna die.
Don't worry about me. Just rescue the survivors in the other rooms.
No! Don't go!
I don't think we appreciate Resident Evil like we should. Yeah, I know, okay, big franchise, intellectual property brand Resident Evil is ubiquitous. It's one of the biggest names in video games, an inescapable institution even. There's like a million RE games and explosions and vampire mommies and all that stuff, but before it was any of that, Resident Evil was a single, kick-ass video game. It came out during the Wild West of early 3D gaming, tackling horror at a time when it was still relatively novel for Western gamers, especially on consoles, and codified survival horror as a genre. It's not the first, but depending on the day you ask, it just may be the best, even all these years later. We all know the mega franchise that Resident Evil would become, but Resident Evils 2 and 3 alongside the original form a nice little trilogy, with either follow-up showcasing very different ideas when it comes to succeeding that classic original title. These three games are very fun to talk about as a trilogy, in that context specifically, so that's what we're gonna do today. This will not be an impartial video, I love these games way too much for that, but hopefully by the end of this thing, anyone within the sound of my voice will understand what makes these original three titles absolutely bang, even in a post-remake world. I've been doing this YouTube thing for over a year now, and honestly, this one is already long overdue. I got the best route for this thing planned out, so top off your health and load up that sidearm. Leave the extra mags in the safe room though, we'll find more on the way. Let's talk about Resident Evil. Blah blah Capcom, blah blah Sweet Home Remake. The history behind Resident Evil's 1996 release is well known, well told, well worn by any number of wikis and videos on this very website, so let's not. You can get the history lesson elsewhere if you're so inclined, but some story setup is in order, I think. People are being eaten in the mountainous outskirts of Raccoon City, and RPD Star's Bravo team has gone missing looking into it. Our Alpha team is now on the case, and almost immediately after landing in the forest zone to investigate, they're attacked by horrible undead dogs and lose one of their own. Helicopter pilot Brad flies off in a panic, leaving Alpha team survivors to sprint for their lives towards the only shelter they can find, a secluded manor. Closing the heavy wooden doors behind them and taking in the eerie mansion's main hall, what's left of Alpha Team realize what they've happened upon is anything but a sanctuary, and their nightmare has only just begun.
What is that?
I'll go and check.
A gunshot rings out in an adjoining hall, and the team investigates only to discover a literal dead man walking. This animated corpse has attacked and is feeding on yet another team member. Kenneth of Star's Bravo team is dead, and we are looking a whole lot like fresh meat. The zombie lunges for our player character, and after narrowly escaping the encounter, the danger of our situation is clear. Between the shambling corpses roaming the halls and the booby traps just waiting to claim the unsuspecting, it almost feels as if the mansion itself wants us dead. This place is a madhouse. The undead pack outside prevents our immediate escape, and we still have any number of STARS members unaccounted for that may need our help. There is no turning back now, and the only way out is through. Enter the survival horror. So this is an all-time horror game setup, right? Really, in any horror story about the mystery of a hostile location, you gotta answer that question of why don't they just leave, and Resident Evil nails this question to the wall hard. The monster dogs already make the 360 nope out a non-option, but the STARS also have teammates they don't want to leave behind. You're also playing as the reinforcements here, there's no one coming to save you. Simply holding out and waiting for help to arrive is not an option here. These characters will not survive without you, the player, moving forward. There is no don't touch that or don't go in there. You have to touch that, you have to go in there. The mechanics of the situation make these characters, and as a result the player, a rat in a maze. What this is a playable horror movie. This is for sure a constricting situation, but for how trapped our characters are, Resident Evil is a surprisingly choosy video game. At the start, we choose our player character, either Chris Redfield, who is strong, or Jill Valentine, who is strong in a feminine way. After that first zombie encounter, we pretty much left to our own devices on where we want to go as well. There's doors all over, and some of them are locked, but a lot of them aren't. The mansion is a kind of puzzle box, and as rooms are explored, you'll find keys for other locked doors, which lead to even more locked doors and contraptions that require their own bespoke items as well. There's minimal handholding here, and this open map gives the player just enough freedom to get a little lost and make discoveries on their own, and that is incredibly satisfying. There's these fun little aha moments that come about when you finally find that crest that fits a hollow you made mental note of a half hour before, or the key that finally opens a door you've had to backtrack past several times, each time building up the mystery just a little more of what may lay behind it. Resident Evil gameplay, of course, is not strictly bring item A to place B to get object C, though. There is a tension in exploration, because outside of those puzzle items, any given door is just as likely to reveal one or more dangerous enemies to contend with. This, I think, is as good a place as any to switch gears and talk about the game's combat and control scheme. Resident Evil uses a character-relative movement scheme commonly referred to as tank controls. With this control layout, up always moves you forward and down always moves you back, with left and right rotating the character in their respective directions. Camera positioning has no bearing on how your character moves with this scheme. They always behave the same way no matter the viewpoint, which is nice since RE frames its action through a static camera with ever-changing angles. Interact and run are mapped to face buttons, and a shoulder button can be held to ready the player's currently equipped weapon, contextually changing the interact button to attack. This is a simple but very divisive control scheme to say the least, but cards on the table, I'm a certified tank control truther and have always loved the way these early horror games control. This control scheme works in tandem with Resident Evil's voyeuristic security camera-esque viewpoint to create a distinct separation between the player and the character we guide through the environment. We are often limited by our angles and can't always see what our character does. While this is not necessarily the most convenient way to maneuver through a game world and face down enemies, especially when compared with, say, another game that came out the same year, this setup does an excellent job of disempowering the player and flavoring RE as that playable horror movie it aspires to. Tank controls are often cited as a flaw with these games when they are looked back on from current year, oftentimes simply because outside of indie homages to this era of horror, games don't really play like this anymore. These controls are actually quite good, though, specifically if you switch off from the analog stick and use the D-pad. They're not slippery or janky or anything, they're responsive and produce consistent results. The game never asks more of you than the controls can deliver, and it's actually a pretty satisfying scheme to get good at. You just gotta learn them. And I do think it's worth it to learn them. This is a different style of play than the accepted conventions of our modern era, but it allows games in this tank control style to have a very different gameplay focus. Tank control games aren't worse versions of first-person or shoulder cam games, they're a different kind of gameplay experience entirely. Let me explain. My interpretation here is that in classic RE, your character isn't you specifically. That's still Chris or Jill on the screen. There is an extra layer of abstraction here you don't really find in other games. In Resident Evil, you don't embody the character so much as work alongside them as a kind of interactive audience member. The player, controller in hand, is more playing the role of the horror movie viewer here, shouting at the screen to run away or fight back, but in Resident Evil, the character actually listens to you. This may sound like a stretch, but consider the way characters relay information directly to the player when you have them examine their surroundings. You, the player, are a part of this experience too. You become a kind of collaborative strategist here, carefully and cautiously nudging your STARS member forward for a better angle to assess a situation and check for threats. You're often relying on the sounds enemies make from off-camera to clue you in on anything that may be sharing the room with your character, so you can tell them how to proceed. Carelessly sprinting forward into the unknown is often a terrible idea thanks to this scheme, and forces a first-time player to slow down and take the danger of the situation seriously, lest they run right into the waiting arms of a hungry zombie. To expand on this player collaboration idea, we can draw a direct line between classic Resident Evil gameplay and a turn-based RPG like, say, Final Fantasy VII. Cloud may be the protagonist of that story, but in combat, the player doesn't control Cloud directly, right? The player's role there is more like this abstract personification of the party's battle tactics. This is why you can give orders to the other characters when Cloud is knocked out. If the player's role was strictly as Cloud himself, instructing the other party members in that situation would be impossible and the game would end. Some RPGs, like say Persona 4, are much more literal with the player's role. In that game, the MC is you and the one making all the decisions, and if he gets knocked out, you're done. The party falls apart without your guidance. Many Persona fans have voiced frustration with this, but when they do, what they're actually asking for is for the player's role in battle to stretch beyond any individual character. They want to be the player, specifically, in their own bespoke role and collaborate with the characters during battle. What they are asking for is abstraction. Classic Resident Evil is much the same. While it is true that the camera here will often leave the player unable to see what's right in front of Jill or Chris's face, the camera can also give the player access to information the character wouldn't have as well. It's not strictly a limitation, there is a give and take here. This is why it's so bad that the original Western releases of the first couple games removed the auto-aim feature. This gameplay style was always built around it. That aim button, when working as intended, doubles as a spot check button, allowing the character to relay vital information back to the player to help the two of you better work together. That layer of collaborative abstraction carries through to the combat as well. The fighting here is less about popping off sick headshots and more if you choose to expend ammo at all and on what. Aiming and firing in this game feels more like instructing your character to take the shot than it does doing it yourself, and this results in a slower wait-and-see kind of element to each action you and the character take together when facing down monsters. Your most common and lowest damage arms, like the handgun or combat knife, have very little in the way of stopping power, so enemies will continue to close the distance as they take damage, and accounting for multiple foes is tense and nerve-wracking. Holding ground and getting another hit in with a weaker weapon versus repositioning into a less advantageous viewpoint, or simply pulling out a stronger weapon and using its rarer ammo, or even just tanking the hit and using a health item. These are interesting decisions you'll constantly be making in Resident Evil's combat scenarios, and all of them have a lasting impact on your supply economy. Those choices you make, whether to put an enemy down or risk damage and maneuvering around them, are weighty and exciting because supplies are limited, especially in the early going. There's a random element to enemy health and damage, so you're never quite sure how many rounds a zombie will take before finally going down, or how much it will hurt if he does get his hands on you for a bite. Trying a door for the first time and finding 3 zombies when you were hoping for a healing item or ammo can be panic-inducing, with poor decision-making often snowballing in the way it usually does across the best horror stories. Enemies are real obstacles in this game, and spending limited ammo on clearing a high-traffic route for backtracking is the kind of decision you can never feel 100% sure about, since the supply economy doesn't exactly guarantee refills of the essentials should the player run out. You find what you find, and you use or save what you have, and hopefully find more. And hopefully what enemies you do clear aren't replaced with something worse. Hopefully. And if you do find more items, you'll need the space for them, which you may not always have. Characters in Resident Evil are rocking a limited inventory, with each individual item taking up its own space in their pocket. That's true not just for puzzle items and keys, but also weapons, their separate ammo stock, and healing items as well. If you want to carry, say, a weapon to defend yourself, some ammo for it, and a healing item in case something goes wrong, that's 3 slots, but then you remember you got a key to carry till you find all the doors it unlocks and you're up to 4. That's half of Jill's item slots and 2/3 of Chris's. If you opt to save ammo and run past enemies instead of taking them down, you're probably going to want to leave some space open so you can grab what you find and cut down on return trips and potential mistakes while traversing more populated halls. Loading up on heals for safety means less space for other supplies. Leaving empty room for potential new finds actually fills a space that could hold a weapon to defend yourself with if you end up cornered. In Resident Evil, what you choose to carry and how you choose to use it is always a trade-off of some kind. Items you may not want to keep on Chris or Jill's person at the moment, like a puzzle item you haven't found a place for yet, or a heal you don't need right this second, can be stored in safe rooms, each with an item box that shares contents and allows access to anything stored in any item box across the game in a collective haul. Once located, each of these safe rooms becomes a kind of mini base of operations, where the player can start planning runs to unexplored rooms to collect what they find and come back to add those supplies to their own stores. Safe rooms also have typewriters for saving the player's game, with each save requiring a consumable item called an ink ribbon. That's right, you cannot save in Resident Evil without a consumable item, which you can, in fact, run out of. This limitation is actually pretty important and goes a long way in preserving the horror mechanically, even against our own gamer impulses. With unlimited saves, autosaves at every door, or the ability to save and load anywhere, it would be pretty easy for most players to incrementally gain an advantage in a very video gamey way, by simply reloading until you got the best result. Being able to save every single time you kill an enemy with minimal ammo used, or without taking damage, would make the monsters feel less threatening and the encounters far less impactful. Ink ribbons, inconvenient as they are, bait the player player into a kind of wager. Sure, you could save after that last supply run, but what if you held out till after the next trip? Fall to an enemy or deadly trap and you'll be out that progress and have to reload a previous save. But if you make it back, you'll be getting even more permanent progress out of that single ribbon, and this makes that fatter save feel like even more of an earned relief. Every enemy encounter or suspicious room carries the weight of more and more progress lost the longer you go without saving, and it may just be your in-game progress on the line here, but what you're actually wagering is the real-world time you'll spend replaying to get back to where you were if you do end up biting it. In that way, a death in Resident Evil actually does kind of kill the player a little too, even if it is just a couple minutes at a time. Progress feels earned here, and the game does a great job of mixing it up and introducing new enemy types right as dancing around the undead could start to feel too familiar. The danger of exploring is never really quantifiable on that first playthrough anyway, since Chris or Joe could also happen upon a dangerous boss enemy to contend with. I've often seen classic Resident Evil bosses derisively called out as little more than resource checks or foregone conclusions that simply fall to the player's hardest hitting weapons. There is certainly some truth to that, on replays I suppose, but to a first timer I think they serve their purpose quite well. Not as tests of mechanical skill, but as a way to throw the player into a tense situation they may not have been prepared for, which is right in line with the rest of Resident Evil's horror gameplay. Bosses aren't exactly signposted per se, and could just be there behind the next door you check. If the player isn't well armed at the moment or hasn't saved in a while, running into a boss they weren't expecting could easily end up one of the most memorable experiences of their whole playthrough. And after a death or on a replay, a boss monster is an encounter the player can plan for and factor into their supply management, giving them good reason to save their better resources and see how far they can get with the weaker stuff, in case the next boss is even harder. A giant snake, a vampire plant, a claw-armed monster man. This is an iconic roster with great designs. The bosses flavor this game's brand of science gone wrong in a really fun way and keep Resident Evil from being just another zombie game. This game offers a very specific kind of horror experience through its gameplay and pacing that simply doesn't come across when experiencing it secondhand from a YouTube video or Twitch stream. You'll have to play it for yourself, and when you do, when it's your character navigating a zombie-infested hallway, when it's your supplies dwindling, when you're the one planning the route through unexplored rooms and not knowing what's on the other side of those doors, buddy, it hits. It hit when it came out, it hits now 30 years later, and it will still hit 30 years from now. It really does not matter how much better graphics get or whatever, game design this good, that executes a vision this well, that don't go out of style. The presentation, however,
The master of unlocking.
Oh no!
Jill Sandwich. You can't kill me.
I didn't know that was going to happen.
is perfect.
Chris? Stop it.
Jokes aside, if anything undermines RE96's horror credibility, it's the script and acting. Legendary stuff though.
Is that Jill?
Is that voice Enrico's?
Yeah?
This is straight up some of the most amateurish acting you will find in any commercial product, but the cutscenes don't actually kill the vibe like you might expect. This is mostly owed to the fact that the horror of Resident Evil is largely mechanical and found almost exclusively in its gameplay rhythms. The player has tons of opportunities to get really sunk into the mechanical atmosphere, exploration, and decision-making for huge chunks of the game before these bizarre interludes crop up and deflate the tension as you watch Wesker shoot at bees or whatever. They don't add to the horror at all, but they do make the game very likable in a way only the most sincere camp can. An honest effort that fails catastrophically can be much more entertaining than something being just baseline good enough.
Barry.
That was a close one. A second late, you would have fit nicely into a sandwich.
My feelings on Resident Evil 96 are actually pretty similar to how I feel about the original 1981 The Evil Dead. That is a film that is clearly made by some college kids. The reality of that production is inescapable throughout your viewing. The effects look fake, there are pickup shots filmed at the wrong time of day, and you can even see the producer in the background here. Some of the content in this movie also probably wouldn't be the way it is if the film's writer and director, Sam Raimi, had lived a little more life before making this one. But there is a manic energy to that movie that is just infectious. It's so raw, it's so loud, the performances are so intense. Everyone is giving it their all, and despite everything, it can still be pretty scary at times. times. The fact that The Evil Dead can be so effective and became such a big deal despite its humble beginnings and technical shortcomings just makes you want to root for it that much more. In its greater cultural context, each of those little nitpicks I listed look less like flaws and more like the scrappy texture of indie art. They are a part of what makes that film and its low-budget success story truly special. The scars of its underdog journey laid bare for all to see, and that is the beauty of an honest effort behind a work of art. I don't know if I'd call video game publisher Capcom a scrappy underdog per se, even in 1996, but this team was new to 3D games and definitely wasn't directing voice performances or live actors before, and they were trying to make it scary. This is a very imperfect, but again, honest effort, and the thing about horror is that you can't really make it without putting a little of yourself on the table. Even if it's not what scares you personally, you're still putting forward what you think might scare someone else, and that is a very intimate conversation to be having. When a horror effort falls this flat though, it's impossible not to see and empathize with the people behind it. How did it end up this way? What is this? It's also absurd. What about these cutscenes did they think actually flavored the horror here?
Oh, Jill, this house is dangerous. There are terrible demons. Ouch!
Well, on one side of the coin, we have the gore, right? We definitely get a lot of that in these cutscenes, and that not only establishes the stakes through side character deaths, but is representative of what can happen to our own characters in gameplay should we fail. A whole lot of the horror here is in keeping your character alive and not ending up mangled like Kenneth here. It is survival horror, after all. The flip side of that coin then is the mystery. All of the characters in this game are like perpetually confused.
What? What is this?
What is it?
Wait, what is that?
Hey, what's going on?
What is it?
Whoa! What is it?
I don't know what's going on.
Well, it can't be helped.
But that's also kind of how you feel in game 2, right? You don't know what's going on. You're checking doors, you find a crest or something and probably go, what is this? And when they're not dying or confused, the STARS team is trying to make a plan.
I'll check the dining room again.
Okay, I'll try the door on the opposite side.
There are a lot of locked rooms in that house. Check them out one more time.
We should blow this place up.
Assessing the situation, figuring out what rooms to check, just like you are. Conceptually at least, I can see what they were going for here. I can smell what they were cooking. The execution is just so technically inept that these cutscenes end up some of the funniest things you will ever see in your life.
Jill, you're here too.
Yes, you're here too?
If I could go back in time, specifically, to replace the voice director and cast here with actual professionals and give one of my favorite games of all time, Resident Evil, a chance to be a serious horror experience in its story scenes, I don't think I would. There is something beautiful and human about Capcom putting out the game in this state, and audiences either looking past the absurd writing and performances to find the horror in the gameplay, or just embracing the goofiness and laughing along, a particular kind of fun Capcom themselves have indulged in since.
Oh my god, are you okay?
Yeah, that was almost a Claire sandwich.
Does Barry tell everyone that story?
These hilarious and insane cutscenes are bad, but they're also real. They really tried their best here. They would be completely tone annihilating if not for that gameplay cutscene split, but as is, I think they just make the game more likable, and I wouldn't change a thing about them. Resident Evil is an expertly designed bit of video game horror on a mechanical level. It also has some of the absolute worst story writing and performances you will ever see. But was still, overall, a very successful horror experience for many, and I'm sorry, I'm always going to love this game for that. The story itself does actually inform the gameplay in less hilarious ways too. Notes are found all over that help us piece the mystery together or set the scene. It's compelling stuff, and some of them are legitimately chilling. The Keeper's Diary is iconic for a reason, and reading the first-person account of a man as he unknowingly chronicles his transformation into the undead is just good zombie fiction. That bit in there where the doctors tell him he doesn't need his hazmat suit anymore and how relieved he is to no longer be wearing it always gets to me, because we of course know what comes after that. In addition to our playable duo having their own exclusive supporting casts, story beats can play out differently depending on the player's actions as well. Could be the order you explore certain rooms and corridors in, or taking the necessary steps to ensure a partner's survival should they fall into danger. This is cool and gives the game some replayability if a player wants to see these different outcomes. That's on top of how built for the replay Resident Evil is in general. The puzzle box this rotting estate represents is of course very satisfying to solve as a first-timer's mystery, but then you roll credits and the game gives you some stats, the number of saves you used and the time it took to get it all done. The screen is a dare. Now you know your way around, you know where the enemies are, you know where the puzzle items go. Bet you could do it all faster. You got a handle on things, you probably don't even need to save as much either. You're a veteran now. How quickly, how efficiently do you think you can survive this horror? Much in the same way a horror movie rewatch can shift an experience from frightening to fun, a Resident Evil replay turns the whole game on its head and can be an absolute blast to get into, promising even more of a blast through unlockables rewarded for the fastest times. While it is very satisfying on a first playthrough to find an item, not know what it's for, lug it around so you get that aha moment and finally place it, there is an equal but very different satisfaction in walking past that same item on a replay and saying, I know where that goes, I don't need that right now, I'll come back for it later, and planning a route to efficiently collect it when you do need it while getting other stuff done. Replays of Resident Evil are a series of puzzles you race to complete, enemy encounters shifting from unknown quantities to obstacles you plan for and execute strategies to deal with, knowing exactly what supplies and enemies wait around the next corner. There is of course always the potential for panic in these replays as well when the player inevitably forgets an enemy placement or misremembers where those bullets were. Overconfidence can lead to riskier plays with even more on the line if a veteran player hasn't saved in a while or doesn't have a healing item on hand because they think they won't need it. I personally don't really save in these games anymore, so every run is permadeath. If something goes wrong then, that horror tension comes right on back despite that familiarity, and that kind of tension is a gift Resident Evil always has the potential to give, no matter how many times you've run through it. Resident Evil 96 is one of the greatest games ever made, a stone-cold, true-blue, dyed-in-the-wool classic. This is mechanically, at base level, the platonic ideal of a survival horror game, and even the stuff it gets wrong, like its bizarre voice acting or clown fart director's cut OST, only serve to entertain in different ways and make the game more likable. There's a whole lot of bull hockey on this here internet about its remake replacing it, but that sentiment, in my professional opinion, is wrong and anti-art. Resident Evil 2002 isn't a straight adaptation, it's a companion piece to the original. There are gags and scares in the remake that prey on past expectations and only really work if the player is familiar with the 96 release. RE 2002 is one of the few video game remakes that actually is in conversation with its source material and isn't trying to replace it. I love that remake. It too is one of my favorite games of all time, but if you only play the remake, you're simply not getting the full RE1 experience. And that would be a shame, because for all the remake gets right, the original Resident Evil, in all its low-poly, goofily acted glory, is playable video game history that shouldn't be missed out on. Anyone who loves horror games should play Resident Evil. This place, this mansion, is certainly showing its age in more ways than one. But if you come inside, stay a while, walk around a bit, I think you'd be impressed with how strong the foundation really is, even all these years later. But what comes next? What does a follow-up to Resident Evil look like? Let's talk about what the folks at Capcom built next on that foundation. Let's talk about Resident Evil 2.
Hello? Is anyone here? Hello? Hello? Look, I'm sorry I bothered you, okay? Just don't come any closer. Are you listening? Wait! Don't shoot!
Get down! We can't stay out here. Head to the police station. It'll be a lot safer. There! Buckle up.
Okay. What's going on? I arrived in town, and the whole place went insane.
The radio's out.
You're a cop, right?
Yeah, first day on the job. Great, huh? Name's Leon Kennedy. Nice to meet you.
Mine's Claire. Claire Redfield. I came to find my brother, Chris.
Hey, could you open the glove box?
Sure. There's a gun inside.
Better take it with you. You okay?
Still in one piece.
Hey! That maniac's gonna whip us! Claire!
Leon!
I'm okay. Head to the station. I'll meet you there.
Okay.
Fittingly enough, you can describe 1998's Resident Evil 2 with 2 words: more and bigger. Mind out of the gutter. It's Resident Evil, but bigger. No longer confined to the grounds of an eerie estate, the streets of Raccoon City itself are ground zero for an exponentially larger and louder outbreak. It's more Resident Evil over a bigger area. Everything about the first game has been expanded here. More areas, more enemies, more weapons, and more character-specific scenarios to play through. It's a bigger, louder, girthier Resident Evil. Mind out of the gutter. Picking up about 2 months after the events of the original, RE2's pair of playable protagonists, Claire Redfield and Leon S. Kennedy, meet up just as they arrive in Raccoon City and everything is going to hell. The tank controls, static cameras, and limited inventory all make a return, but this ain't 1996 anymore, and this ain't your Meemaw's Resident Evil. There's no empty main halls to collect your thoughts, no creeping dread or quiet tension. You don't have time to think about anything. Instead, we get an explosion, and the streets are on fire, and there's zombies everywhere, and they're coming for you, and what are you still standing around for? You better move. Hey, a survivor. Never mind. We weave through back alleys and wreck streets jam-packed with undead obstacles to try and reach the police station and hopefully some relative safety. At the very least, it's gotta be better than being out in the open like this and at the mercy of the Horde. Our playable characters are Leon, who is strong, and Claire, who is strong in a feminine way. Both have their own reasons for being here. Claire is looking for her brother, who just so happens to be the first game's Chris Redfield. He's gone missing since the events of RE1, and Claire's in town to see what's up. Meanwhile, Leon was set to start working for the RPD in what has to be the worst first day of any job ever. Much like the first game, either protag has different supporting characters they run into over the course of their adventure. It's a great cast, and the story is given appropriate weight thanks to the believable motivations of our protagonists and the people they run into. Both Leon and Claire have good reasons to be here and happen upon other people they want to keep safe, and that's on top of helping each other survive this nightmare they found themselves in. Claire and Leon are simply good people in a bad situation. They're very likable, and the upgrades to both the script and overall quality of the voice performances is appreciated here.
Hang in there.
Don't worry about me. Just rescue the survivors in the other rooms. Here, take this key card. You should be able to unlock the doors in the hall with this. Now go.
But...
just go.
Fine. But I'm coming back for you. Just hold on.
I'm always going to love the surreal nonsense of the first game's storytelling.
It's Forrest. Oh my god.
But the writing and acting here, while it can be a little wooden at times, has a lot of heart and is well done.
When I saw the uniform, I thought you were another zombie.
I wouldn't call it the best performances on PS1 or anything. Metal Gear Solid and Legacy of Kain do exist after all, but this is still very good, and the upgrade to the storytelling serves RE2 well. This game gets up to some cool world building, and it's fun to watch our characters fight for survival and untangle the mystery of the outbreak here. We, as returning players, already know what's up, so much of that trademark RE mystery is shifted to the motivations of the supporting cast, whether it's the erratic and dangerous Annette Birkin, the absolutely vile Chief Irons, or the enigmatic Ada Wong. You may have noticed when talking about RE1 that I didn't have much to say about how it looked. This is mainly because, camera angles aside, I find the visuals of that game to be perfectly serviceable, but nothing to write home about. No shade to that first entry, it's rocking its 96 chic the best it can, but the graphical bump here is noticeable and appreciated. Characters have a lot more detail and sport weightier animations. I love the variety of zombies we get now, and the background detail in particular is next level here. The first game had very stark backgrounds that were so uncanny at times it almost felt like you were walking around on top of a surrealist painting. It gave that game a vibe, for sure, that I really appreciate, almost like a playable, hazy memory of a nightmare. RE2, however, spoils us with detail in depicting ruined streets, cluttered police desks, and dirty laboratories. The overall brighter, richer color palette stylizes this one very differently, making each camera angle feel almost like playable 90s comic book panels. This is a very striking game. I adore the way Resident Evil 2 looks, and comparing this game directly to the first, this is quite the glow up. RE2 also has one of my favorite game soundtracks ever. Not much more to say there, it's just very good. Have a listen. So nice, Capcom sold it twice. I hate it here. The bump in animation quality really adds to the game feel here too. Characters feel heavier and more part of the world than they did in RE1. Our protagonists even visibly show the damage they've taken now in their movements. This actually makes RE2 a slightly more punishing game than the first, with poor decision making more likely to snowball in the sequel, as limping away from zombies on low health is a whole lot tougher when your character is actually limping. Speaking of, the undead shamble towards us in much more unpredictable ways here. I'm a huge fan of the zombie movements in this game. No longer the uniform, arms outstretched ghoul walk, we get animations here that mirror the zombie acting from the best movies in the genre. The undead can now be pushed into each other and knocked over after a bite, and they got some new tricks too. Zombies can now lunge forward and grab your feet and can even be bisected with a shotgun, with the top half still crawling towards you. It's so cool. The new non-zombie enemies and bosses we get here are also iconic in their own right. The previous game filled its non-zombie roster with science gone wrong creations right out of 50s horror flicks, and they're great on their own terms. A giant snake, giant spiders, their own take on the Grundle fly, and culminating in a Frankenstein's monster-esque super soldier. RE1 feels very classic horror in that way. Meanwhile, RE2 is pretty clearly sourcing 80s fright flicks for its baddie inspiration. Birkin's multiple gory transformations mirror John Carpenter's The Thing as he implants the unsuspecting with xenomorph chestbursters right out of Alien. Then you get to B-Game and are pursued by a new model of Tyrant who isn't not the Terminator. He even falls in molten steel, it ain't exactly subtle. Standout among standouts here, though, has to be the Licker. Iconic design, exposed brain and muscle tissue, huge claws, and a prehensile stabbing tongue. It, like most RE enemies, makes distinct noises to let you know when you're sharing a room with one. But that low, breathless moan it makes is a contender for most effective soundbite in any horror game. RE1's dual protagonist setup is also expanded on in the sequel thanks to the revolutionary partner's zapping system. After choosing a character and finishing a campaign, the opposite protag can then be loaded up for a second scenario, known as the B-Game. The B-Game has remixed item locations, enemy layouts, and even completely different boss encounters. On top of that, certain actions taken by the previous character in the A run can impact the goings-on in B. It's also important to note that the A game is already pretty different between the playable duo as is, meaning RE2 effectively doubles the amount of playable and replayable content on offer when compared to the original. Much like that first game, RE2 teases and tempts the player to replay, but with even more unlockables rewarded for higher ranks this time around, including whole new scenarios and minigames to play with different characters. There is so much video game here, and even all these years later, RE2 is still an embarrassment of riches in the content department. Resident Evil 2 is classic sequel escalation. You take the thing people liked, you make more of it, you make it bigger, you make it louder, better in places, but mostly, you make more, and it slaps. Resident Evil 2 is one of the best games, it's one of the best of its genre, it's one of the best of its era. This is just an incredibly playable and replayable game, an undeniable survival horror classic. However, I think it's clear that I love Resident Evil 2 at this point, but it's worth noting the difference in focus between it and that first game it's a follow-up to. While Resident Evil 96 begins with the player in relative safety after its opening and making a choice as to which direction they'll explore the unknown location they found themselves in, RE2 is, not that. The game literally begins with an explosion and the player being hurried forward through a handful of screens that contain as many, if not more, zombies than the entire first floor of RE1's mansion. There is generally a lot more go 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 here, and even when your character reaches the first mansion-esque interconnected location that is the RPD, this area is still much more linear than that first game's mansion location. The player has less potential routes and is simply much less likely to get lost because exploration has taken a back seat to more numerous enemy encounters in this entry. You're going to find more weapons, more ammo for them, and deal with way more enemies. That's not a bad thing per se, but it is a very specific focus, right? It is telling that when choosing what to expand on from that first game, they didn't make the locations more complex or the puzzles harder. The mechanic from the first game where you examine 3D items in the menu for puzzle solutions has even been done away with entirely. Exploration here is easier, but now you have more monsters to fight off, and with the better animations, it feels way better to do battle. The weapons in general are more fun, and as a result, feel just a little more like toys here. You even get a machine gun, and just look at what the custom shotgun does to zombies. Fans of the series often deride later entries for kind of falling off the horror wagon and skewing more action, but I'd argue that action moviefication actually got started as early as this first sequel. It's just been a much more gradual process as the series goes on. We're still a ways off from bullet time cutscenes and suplexes though. For my money, there's a pretty nice mix of thrills and chills in RE2.
You lose, big guy.
This action escalation doesn't come from nowhere though. Assuming the player is coming to RE2 with experience from the first game, a slower start and happening upon one or two zombies in a room would probably feel more routine than anything else. It's not hard to see why they would escalate things specifically in this way. That same returning player boots up Resident Evil 2 and the apocalyptic imagery of multiple zombies on that flaming street is the mission statement. This is a bigger, badder Resident Evil. You are not safe. Get moving and get ready for a fight. This isn't some betrayal of what Resident Evil was, it's assuming a growing competency on the player's part and challenging that, refusing to let returning players get comfortable through sheer volume of threats alone. Despite the many gameplay improvements of RE2, this shift in focus for the sequel also allows RE1 to continue to fill its own niche within the series and continue to be worth playing in its own right. Games never really replace each other on an artistic front anyway, but even on a mechanical level, RE1 has not been iterated into obsolescence here. That is a slower game. It's focused specifically on a creeping dread that the sequel doesn't really try to replicate. To draw a direct comparison to one of Resident Evil's obvious inspirations, the first game is closer to the 1979 film Alien, with its focus on coming to grips with an unknown situation and barely surviving. Meanwhile, RE2, with its action focus, higher enemy count, and audience foreknowledge, is closer to the 1986 sequel Aliens, in more ways than one. RE298 is so many people's favorite Resident Evil, and I totally get it. This one is just a joy to experience for horror fans. The art direction is top-notch, the soundtrack is phenomenal, it's a great mix of the gameplay rhythms that made the first game satisfying, and the increase in stakes make the combat thrilling in its own way when compared to the first game. There's enough content here to stay busy for a very long time, and that's before you get into any rank chasing or unlockables. From a critical standpoint, I really wish I had more to say about RE2 outside of it good, but as a bigger, badder Resident Evil, it simply understood the assignment and over-delivered. This is an all-timer, one of the best in the whole survival horror canon. It's one of the best games, period. Everyone should play Resident Evil 2. If Resident Evil built a foundation, RE2 built a whole city on top of it. But a city can feel an awful lot like a maze, especially if you're trapped in its alleyways and ruined streets with a pursuer, a nemesis, hot on your heels. Let's talk about Resident Evil 3.
This is Chopper Delta, preparing to drop off at area E95070. Over.
What are they?
Proceed to Richmond and Victoria.
September 28th, daylight. The monsters have overtaken the city. Somehow, I'm still alive.
With the groundwork laid by the first entry and the expanded scope of the sequel, Resident Evil 3 had a lot to work with and build upon. It's interesting then that rather than building out in the same way RE2 did, this third entry instead strips back for a more focused experience. That might sound like a downgrade, and to some I suppose it is, but there is a lot more going on under the hood here than first meets the eye, and for my money, Resident Evil 3 is a brilliant sequel and a fantastic way to cap off this original PlayStation trilogy. We're down to a single playable character this time around. Returning fan favorite Jill Valentine is back in the protagonist role and carving her own path out of the now zombie-infested Raccoon City in a desperate attempt at a last escape. It was revealed all the way back in the first game that the zombies and creepy crawlies we've been battling were caused by the pharmaceutical conglomerate Umbrella and their secret experiments with viral weaponry. This of course is a ridiculous story, and megacorporations, as we know, never get up to anything evil, so the surviving STARS members were simply not believed when they blew the lid on it. Jill resigned from the RPD and was on her way out of town when the citywide outbreak kicked off. Tonally, RE3 is different from the other two games. Resident Evils 1 and 2, for all their grisly imagery and corporate espionage, are still uplifting tales about good people at the end of the day. The STARS Alpha team in 1, or Leon and Claire in 2, are trying their best to save as many people as they can. By RE3, Jill's kinda over it though, and this is actually the start of a recurring theme with characters in this series. As they're exposed to the evil, resident in man, and survive these nightmarish experiences, characters return with a harder edge, and we see them grapple with how to feel about people in general.
Casualties continue to mount over the long years I've struggled. More and more I find myself wondering if it's all worth fighting for.
While there's always a bad guy to blow up at the end of these stories or an evil entity to point fingers at, Resident Evil as a series doesn't shy away from the idea that these lethal consequences we see are on some level earned through public complacency. Jill is actually pretty judgmental of the people of Raccoon City in her opening monologue here. She's obviously bitter that no one believed her and the rest of STARS, and even implies to some extent that whatever happens here happens in part because these people, on some level, had it coming.
No one dared to oppose them, and that lack of strength would ultimately lead to their destruction. I suppose they had to suffer the consequences of their actions, but there would be no forgiveness. If only they had had the courage to fight. It's true that once the wheels of justice begin to turn, nothing can stop them. Nothing.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to cancel Jill Valentine here. She's not heartless. She's even trying unsuccessfully to convince this rando at the start of the game to come with her because she feels that's what would be best for him. But largely speaking, these people, the city, they're already dead, and she knows it. We're not here to save anyone. We're not the reinforcements. Jill's number one priority now is her own escape. Resident Evil 3 looks awesome. It's in keeping with that kind of 90s comic book art style that RE2 had, but we somehow get even more detailed backgrounds this time around that really sell the chaos and ruin of Raccoon City. There's wrecked cars and crumbling buildings rocked by previous explosions and debris and bodies just everywhere. Raccoon City looks like hell on earth, and it rules. This is peak zombie apocalypse imagery, and walking through these pre-renders, it's easy to see why Raccoon City is such a compelling setting for so many series fans. Even in Ruin, these storefronts and alleyways paint a picture of an artsier and eclectic take on an American city that looks like it could have been a pretty cool place to call home. I like how something as simple as public transit takes the form of a cable car here instead of something more generic and boring like a subway train. Little touches like that give Raccoon City a little more personality than you might expect from your average Anytown USA, and that personality heightens the tragedy here. Raccoon is a cool city. It's sad to see it go. I haven't mentioned this with the other two games yet, but all three of these titles have such stylish inventory screens too. The artwork for the items you pick up is really nice, and I'm a huge fan of the beeps and boops that ring out as you navigate these menus. Yeah, that's the good stuff. Just like RE2, the soundtrack is excellent as well, sporting my favorite save room theme of the series. It's an excellent track that sets a really worried tone and perfectly captures the desperation of our heroine this time around. As RE3 gets going, we set out into Raccoon City and get back into that familiar Resident Evil rhythm. Back to the same enemy encounters and key collecting we're used to, but there is a sense of sustained urgency to the pacing here that you don't really get out of the previous 2 games outside of their climaxes, barring that hectic opening of RE2. We're less unraveling a larger puzzle box and stocking supplies, more grabbing what you can and clearing obstacles in the way of your forward momentum. Unlike the first 2 games, we're not looking for a safe place to hold up or performing a search and rescue. This time, it's escape above all else. Jill eventually runs into a former comrade, Alpha Team's helicopter pilot, Brad Vickers. Before running off in a panic, Brad says that someone is after STARS members. Following that encounter, Jill is once again left alone in the city to continue her journey, which eventually brings her back to her old place of employment, the RPD building.
Jill!
Brad!
We've gotta... Jill! Help!
No!
The introduction to the Nemesis is one of the most effective moments in all of horror gaming. He's appropriately built up through that earlier encounter with Brad, and when he finally shows up, promptly demonstrates that Brad was very right to be as afraid as he was. Then he turns to Jill and makes it clear that she's next. This is where RE3 introduces its live selection system, which allows the player to choose between branching options during specific cutscenes. The very first thing Resident Evil 3 does after introducing the Nemesis and showcasing his brutality is use a brand new mechanic to ask you specifically if you want to run away from him. Resident Evil games don't do this. Bosses have always existed in this series as surprise roadblocks during exploration and as bottleneck resource checks, a way to up the tension if a player has been careless while exploring or hasn't saved in a while. The fight or flight has also always been implicit in normal enemy encounters as well, but neither of the previous games have taken the time to specifically say that the threat you're facing down right now is probably too much for you. Even if you try to puff that chest out and choose to fight him, dude's tough, especially for what supplies you'll have by this point, and most players, even series veterans, will be put in their place. Most players will simply have to run. Most players will learn, right here, to fear the Nemesis. It's not a coincidence that this all happens in front of the RPD building as well. After ducking inside, a series vet gets to retread familiar ground for a bit while hunting for the next items they need for progression. This is the RPD from 2. You know this place, just like Jill, who used to work here, does. It's even a little cozy in a way, until it isn't. Yeah, okay, nice jump scare. Listen, I know all about this. I played the RE2B game, okay? The tyrant busts through the wall, scares you good, and you just leave. You're not even blocking the door. I already got what I needed. I'm gonna dip. See you at the next jump scare, buddy. You continue on towards the exit, thinking you gave him the slip, only for your heart to drop as you hear the door open behind you, followed by a low growl and a now familiar theme kicking in. The Nemesis is different. He isn't just a boss fight. He isn't just a set piece. He actually pursues you from room to room. Resident Evil games don't do this. This moment, when the player realizes that the Nemesis is not confined to rooms in the same way nearly every other enemy in the series has been up to this point, is a masterclass in leveraging player expectation to instill panic. And it's no accident that this happens in a familiar location from the previous game, to make sure you are as comfortable as possible for maximum effect. Resident Evil 3 is very aware of its place in the series and what you already know about how Resident Evil works. Your knowledge of the previous games is used against you here for one of the best scares in the whole genre. It's so good. The Nemesis, true to his name, will be a persistent threat for the remainder of RE3's runtime, and this is a massive shakeup to the Resident Evil formula. All these years later, the Nemesis remains, to many, myself included, the GOAT. the single greatest stalker-type enemy in a horror game. He has an iconic catchphrase and an incredible design besides, but on a mechanical level, this original incarnation of the Nemesis has been implemented so effectively here that he really hasn't been topped in the genre since. In RE3, he'll show up for specific encounters during story progression, of course, but after he takes care of Brad, Jill is his next target. He's out there, somewhere, stomping around Raccoon City. He's looking for you and will occasionally just show up without warning during regular gameplay to make an attempt on Jill's life. You could be doing the usual Resident Evil thing, bringing supplies back to a safe room, or on the way back to a puzzle or lock with a key in hand, open a door and... Resident Evil games don't do this. He's so dangerous, too. You might expect an enemy this big, fought this early, to be a high damage but lumbering foe in keeping with all but the final bosses of the previous games, but nope. Sometimes he shows up with a friggin' rocket launcher, cause he needed that, I guess, and if he's boom tubeless, he's sprinting up in your face to deliver damaging and hard to avoid grabs and punches. If he catches you in a corner, these attacks can even chain together and burst you down from full health to loading a previous save, which are still limited, by the way. While the Nemesis is very dangerous, it's important to note that he's not invincible. Remember that first life selection choice. You can fight him off, it's just hard. And that's actually a much more compelling dynamic than just making him invincible would be. Sometimes you get boxed in and might feel the need to fight back. It sucks to use the ammo and probably some health items too, let's be real, but the ability to actually fight back and not be forced to run in situations where the Nemesis jumps you keeps him feeling much more a part of your decision making, as opposed to a set piece, and as a result, he feels more real. He can even kill other enemies if they get in the way of his pursuit. I'm also a big fan of how if you duck into a safe room with the Nemesis on your heels, he'll wait outside a bit before giving up. The safe room theme actually doesn't kick in until he's gone. Resident Evil 3 is a generally meaner game than the first two. Hell, there isn't even a normal difficulty. Hard mode is the default. There's a clear focus here on challenging returning players. It's not just the Nemesis either. Enemies across the board are much more aggressive in this entry, with zombies now able to break into a sprint and appearing in large groups even more often than before. The newly introduced Drain Deimos enemy is horrible and runs at you like this. RE3 also taps into some PTSD with the return of the Hunter, an enemy veterans of the first title are bound to have a panicked reaction to. Cleared out areas are also unlikely to stay that way for long, often repopulating with an accompanying jump scare. Through gameplay alone, RE3 makes it clear that Raccoon City is not safe, and lingering in any one place for any length of time is a death sentence. As always, escape is priority number 1. Jill Valentine, however, is a veteran survivor and has returned packing some new tricks to ensure that when things go sideways, she can give just as good as she gets. We're still rocking tank controls, but Jill can now 180 quick turn for faster repositioning with a simultaneous press of down and the run button. This is a wonderful addition and becomes second nature quickly. There are also a number of high damage interactables in the environment like explosive barrels or pressurized steam vents that can be targeted with a separate aim button. I love this inclusion because it gives encounters an extra layer of improvisation and rewards attentiveness and quick thinking on the player's part. Good timing and aim can now see the player saving some ammo and looking damn cool in the process. Perhaps the biggest addition to the control scheme is the emergency dodge. In a first for the series, tapping a button in time with an enemy attack will trigger an evasive maneuver from Jill. This is also a really cool addition, and I love how depending on the dodge, Jill will shoulder check zombies or sidestep dog lunges. If you aim right after she does the dodge roll, you'll even do this sick combat pose. There are a couple of caveats keeping the dodge from being overpowered though. The timing is quite strict, and you can't do it while injured. There's no invincibility to it, and the player has no control over which animation triggers, so even when timed correctly, it can still be a little bit of a dice roll, especially with additional enemies in the mix. This unreliability is of course by design, to keep the dodge from becoming a spammable first order strategy. As is, the dodge fits in quite nicely here as the last resort it's intended as. Positioning is still king in RE3, and not being there in the first place is always going to be the best way to avoid damage. Still, the dodge is very appreciated, and can be clutch when the Nemesis closes the distance and gets to swinging. The shakeups don't stop there though, because Resident Evil 3 also introduces gunpowder to the supply list. Gunpowders A and B can be picked up and mixed in various ways to craft different kinds of ammo. The system would go on to appear in many RE games after this one, but if I'm being honest, 3's implementation is still my favorite. Not only due to the sheer variety in ammo types this game sports between the various grenade rounds and even enhanced ammo, but the inclusion of the reloading tool really brings the system together here. You can mix powder all day long in RE3, but it never actually turns into usable ammo until it's combined with the reloading tool item, which takes up its own space in Jill's inventory. This has a massive impact on the supply economy while exploring. Most folks are going to keep that reloading tool in the item box, so it's not taking up pocket space. This means that any powder found in the field is something you're going to want to pick up, but is not immediately useful until you can get back to the safe room and turn it into ammo. Outside of modifying grenades, there are no instant supplies for mashing gunpowder together by itself on the fly here like so many games that include similar systems. They could end up the same in the end, but the difference between finding a box of shotgun shells or some gunpowder B in RE3 is massive. If Nemesis has shown up, your boomstick has run dry, and you're not anywhere near an item box and that reloading tool. That's on top of the interesting decisions that come about when you're in a safe room, preparing to head back out again and taking inventory, when you might consider making do and crafting weaker rounds, or doing without now and saving up to make the good stuff. Gunpowder's inclusion is very welcome here and gets the player making even more interesting and weighty supply decisions moment to moment, which, as we know, is what survival horror and Resident Evil is all about. Between the dodge rolling, barrel exploding, ammo crafting, live selecting, and of course Nemesis fleeing, the stakes have been even further raised for this third entry. That everything is on fire, we gotta get out of here now panic mindset from the start of the second game is expanded on and becomes the overall tone of Resident Evil 3. The areas are shorter and left behind faster to reflect this get out at all costs mindset. Jill is more capable alongside a returning player to better fight back against an even more hostile Raccoon City. The Nemesis lives up to his name, initially terrorizing the player, making them feel like a rat in a maze, boxing them in, eventually forcing Jill to fight back and show what she's made of, shifting the paradigm as the story goes on and creating one of the greatest back and forth rivalries in all of video games.
You want stars? I'll give you stars.
How you feel about how much Resident Evil 3 offers content-wise is going to tie directly to how much you enjoy its focus on replayability. While these games have always done their best to goad a replay or two out of players through their satisfying mechanics and unlockables, I am well aware that a lot of folks are not really interested in playing a game more than once. Those players who are not super into chasing higher ranks, trying different strategies, or seeing what different outcomes the live selection system has to offer probably won't think as highly of RE3 as the second game due to its shorter runtime. The waters of Resident Evil 3 may not spread as wide, but the trenches are deeper for those willing to dive. For me, Resident Evil 3 is one of the most compelling games in the whole series. Between the different choices you can make in live selection, randomized item and enemy placements, how good you can get at dodging, and how you choose to mix your gunpowder, there's a lot of different ways to play and express yourself within RE3's mechanics. Game's tough. This is one of the harder A ranks to get in the whole series, and RE3 feels great to get good at in general. The Nemesis, while terrifying on the first playthrough, becomes a satisfying challenge on repeat runs, and the game even doles out some really cool rewards for taking him down throughout the game. Like, have you seen the Western Custom? Then you have the arcade-style Mercenaries minigame, which has its own playable characters and unlocks even more fun stuff for the main game. A whopping 9 playthroughs worth of epilogues to unlock for loreheads, and the most unlockable costumes the series has seen to this day. RE3 carves out its own niche within this trilogy. If you're operating on the same wavelength as Resident Evil 3, if you're the kind of player that likes getting better through replays, the kind that likes a good challenge and consistent rewards for rising to meet it, RE3 is a fantastic sequel and stands right alongside the first 2 REs as one of the best of its genre. If RE2 built a city on the first game's foundation, Resident Evil 3 levels it and has a grand old time playing in the rubble. The ways in which it chooses to expand on and subvert what Resident Evil is mechanically make for an excellent follow-up to what came before, and a perfect end cap to this era of Resident Evil. It's a more intense game than even the second, and that quiet tension of the first installment is all but a memory, lost in the constant forward movement and cacophony of explosions. We are much more focused on thrills than chills in RE3, but what a thrill. It is funny to think that that first pair of mansion double doors back in RE1 would lead us to a city leveled by a nuclear explosion, but if we look back over the journey, yeah man, why not? It feels to me like we got here honestly enough. Blow up the mansion, blow up the lab, blow up the city. As the scope of the infection grows, so too must the countermeasures, and that ultimately is the nature of sequel escalation, isn't it? Resident Evil 3 understands that where we go from here is ultimately up to the ones moving forward after, and there are a few better ways to say you can't go home again than by making that home an irradiated crater. So why you should play Resident Evil? Why would I, a let's be real small YouTuber, feel the need to tell anyone that these early Resident Evil games are great, that they're worth playing today? Well, first off, hello, welcome in if you're new. You Should Play is a series I do. I love to talk about games that I think are really good and why. I have an interest in video games as an experiential art form. I find game mechanics in particular and how they help to create an experience to be fascinating and really enjoy writing about that. If that sounds cool to you, if you want to support a creator who's passionate about the stuff they make and isn't just trying to read a Wikipedia plot synopsis at you, like and subscribe. If you like horror stuff, I got Evil Within and Dead Rising videos you can check out after this one. I'm pretty proud of those. Self-promotion aside, with Resident Evil being the mega franchise that it is, I could see the average person finding the sentiment redundant. Like, oh, you're gonna tell me that the first games in one of the highest selling video game series ever are good. Crazy. In other news, water is wet and the sun is hot, but there is more to it than that. Now this is the part of the script where I had a whole rant cooked up, literally multiple pages about games as art, about watching the foundational texts of our medium be devalued and reduced to stepping stones toward whatever the current modern standard happens to be. Don't get me wrong, that is an issue with a lot of games writing. This idea that we've settled into a handful of correct 3D games and everything before a certain point and just hadn't figured it out yet and isn't really worth any consideration beyond nostalgia or whatever. On a personal level, I don't like how dismissive gamers writ large can be towards older titles when discussing this art form. But we also only have so many hours in the day, and I'm not here to judge you over how you spend what little free time you get between grueling work shifts and school schedules or time with your kids. What you like is what you like, and if you want to unwind with a new game that plays how you know over an old one that you'd have to learn, or God forbid you want to play a remake, that don't make you some piggy at the slop trough, and anyone that would say that is a real jerk. We live in stressful times, and I ain't here to finger wag at anybody. Find your fun where and how you can. But these games, Resident Evil 1 through 3, are so good. It all gets lost in this sea of opinions we exist in today. This constant noise of nostalgia and video game canon and franchise iteration and what's dated and what's slop and who's a real gamer and what does or doesn't hold up to modern standards, whatever that means. But these games are good. I get that there may be a learning curve for you, but on one of those days when you got some time, some patience, and a mind to adjust, fire up RE1. I think the average gamer would be surprised how quickly they can adapt to something if they just focus on what a game is instead of what it isn't, on what you can do instead of what you can't. These aren't shooters, they're games of positioning and planning. Approach it in that way and before you know it, you're in the mindset, creeping slowly, listening for threats off screen, pulling off dodges you never would have thought possible when you first started, piecing together a map and setting your own little exploration goals for forward progress that's satisfying in a way simply following a paint trail could never replicate. These games are good, and I truly believe that anyone who dismisses and doesn't at least try them is missing out. And as you might have noticed from a look at my channel, I like to share the things I enjoy, and I just hate seeing people miss out. Either way, no matter how you do it, grab these original games, turn the lights down, get sunk in, let the mechanical atmosphere wash over you, and have a good time getting creeped out. The original Resident Evil trilogy are some of the greatest games ever made. That will always be true, no matter what comes out after. Mechanically, they fulfill the promise of playable horror flicks in ways that even later games in this same series haven't really been able to capture. These games are love letters to different eras of horror and wrap all that up in banger art direction and stellar music, mostly. If you bring the right mindset, they'll pull you in, and before you know it, you're fighting for your life and planning routes and conserving supplies. Then when it's all over, you can go again, even better than before, because who doesn't want that infinite rocket launcher? First time or replay, any horror fan owes it to themselves to experience the original Raccoon City, and you can only do that if you play the original Resident Evil trilogy.